Welcome to Modern Crime Scope, your go-to channel for gripping real-life mysteries, shocking investigations, and in-depth true crime stories. We dive deep into cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat, uncovering the secrets behind headlines and revealing the truth hidden beneath the surface. Claire Miller appeared on live television, tears streaming down her face as she begged for the safe return of her missing baby. But behind her trembling voice and shattered expression, detectives were already uncovering cracks in her story that would turn a grieving mother into the prime suspect of a chilling case. Claire Miller sat in front of a row of cameras, her hands trembling as makeup artists dabbed away at her cheeks before the lights switched on. The news station was filled with hushed whispers and the heavy weight of sympathy that came with covering a tragedy. Her 8-month-old baby, Lily, was missing, and the entire town had turned its attention toward her. As the broadcast began, Claire's face filled television screens across the state. Her eyes swollen and red, her voice cracking as she begged anyone watching to come forward with information. The country had seen grieving mothers before, but something about Claire's broken voice and the image of a helpless baby gone without a trace struck a deeper nerve. People who had never met her felt as though they knew her, and many were moved to tears by her plea. Vigils began almost immediately. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks outside her small home, clutching candles, holding signs with Lily's name written in bold letters, and praying silently as the cameras rolled. Across social media, photos of Lily's round face, soft curls, and wide brown eyes spread rapidly. Volunteers began organizing search parties, combing through nearby woods, parks, and riverbanks. To everyone watching, it seemed like a community pulling together to save one of its most vulnerable members. The police stood at the edges of these gatherings, quietly doing their work while the spotlight remained on Claire. Detectives were careful not to show their doubts publicly, but behind the scenes, they were already analyzing every word spoken during the televised appeal. Claire's account of the night Lily disappeared was hauntingly simple. She had put her daughter to sleep in the crib around 9:00, gone to bed herself, and then woken in the early hours to find the crib empty. No broken windows, no doors ajar, just silence and an empty nursery. To the public, this story painted a terrifying picture of a stranger slipping into the safety of a home, stealing a baby under the cover of night. It was the type of nightmare that every parent feared. But for detectives who had seen countless cases before, the details seemed almost too clean, too perfect. Still, in the days following that first interview, the focus remained on the search. Helicopters circled over the town, their spotlights cutting through the dark. Volunteers trudged through fields, calling Lily's name with growing desperation. Flyers were plastered on storefronts and telephone poles, offering a reward for any information. Reporters hounded Claire for follow-up statements, chasing her down her driveway with microphones, but she was shielded by friends and family who insisted she needed space to grieve. Through it all, Claire presented herself as the shattered mother clinging to hope, her hands clasped tightly around a small stuffed rabbit that had once belonged to Lily. The entire community was swept up in the image of her sorrow. Yet even in those early days, when emotions were raw and compassion overflowed, quiet questions began to whisper through the police station. Why had no one heard anything that night? Why had the dog in the backyard not barked? Why were there no footprints in the mud leading to or from the house? To the public, these details didn't exist yet. All they saw was a mother's grief broadcast live, a mother whose every tear convinced them of her innocence. To the investigators watching the same footage, however, those tears were something else entirely, a performance that demanded closer inspection. Detectives began the slow, meticulous process of breaking down Claire's story piece by piece, comparing her words to the physical evidence they were gathering. On the surface, Her account of putting Lily to bed at 9 and waking to find the crib empty seemed straightforward, but when investigators retraced her timeline, they encountered gaps that did not add up. The first red flag was the condition of the front door. Claire claimed she always locked it at night, yet when officers arrived after her 911 call, the door was shut and bolted from the inside. If an intruder had entered, there was no sign of forced entry, and no indication the lock had been tampered with. Windows were also secure, their frames undisturbed. It was as though the baby had vanished into thin air without anyone coming or going. The neighborhood canvass yielded more questions than answers. Detectives went door to door, asking if anyone had noticed suspicious vehicles or strangers during the night. No one had seen anything unusual. The street was quiet, and most of the neighbors were in bed early. Even the surveillance cameras mounted on a store just 2 houses down showed no movement during the crucial hours when Lily supposedly disappeared. The footage revealed empty sidewalks, still streets, and nothing to suggest an outsider creeping toward Claire's home. To officers reviewing the tapes, the silence of the night contradicted the mother's claims of a sudden and mysterious abduction. More inconsistencies emerged when Claire was interviewed again. Detectives asked her to walk through the events of the night a second time, hoping her memory might sharpen, but instead, her story wavered. At one point, she said she had gone straight to bed after putting Lily down. Later, she admitted she had stayed up for a while scrolling on her phone. She first claimed she slept soundly until the early hours, but when pressed, she mentioned hearing faint noises she could not explain. Each retelling introduced new details or removed old ones, leaving investigators increasingly skeptical. Officers also paid close attention to the physical environment inside the house. In the nursery, the crib was neatly made, as though no struggle or disturbance had occurred. Lily's blanket was folded at the foot of the mattress, a strange detail considering Claire had initially said her baby had been tucked in under it. A nearby rocking chair showed no signs of recent use, and the diaper bag, often kept by the crib, was empty and stored away. To trained eyes, the room looked staged, almost too orderly for the chaos of a disappearance. Despite these troubling signs, the public narrative remained fixed on the grieving mother's sorrow. Television networks replayed clips of Claire's teary plea, shaping her as a symbol of desperation rather than suspicion. But within the precinct, detectives were exchanging notes filled with question marks. The lack of physical evidence pointing to an intruder and the shifting timeline painted a very different picture. Each small crack in Claire's version of events began to spread, creating fractures that hinted at something more sinister. The story that had captured the nation's sympathy was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own inconsistencies, and investigators quietly shifted their focus from the unknown kidnapper to the woman who claimed to be the victim. Detectives began widening their investigation, moving beyond the walls of Claire's home to understand more about her personal struggles. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors were interviewed, and the portrait that emerged was far more complicated than the one shown on television. Claire had always been described as polite but withdrawn, someone who kept her troubles hidden. Yet underneath the surface, she had been carrying the weight of financial strain and emotional isolation. Records revealed overdue rent notices piled up in her mailbox, utility bills marked with final warnings, and bank statements showing her account teetering on empty. She had lost her job at a local cafe 3 weeks before Lily's disappearance, a detail she had failed to mention to reporters. The story of a loving, stable mother desperately waiting for her baby's safe return now seemed to be missing crucial context. Those closest to Claire admitted she had appeared increasingly overwhelmed in the weeks leading up to the incident. A neighbor recalled seeing her pacing the yard late at night with Lily in her arms, the infant crying while Claire muttered under her breath, her face pale and tired. A cousin told investigators that Claire had confided about struggling to manage her emotions since giving birth. Medical files confirmed she had been prescribed medication for postpartum depression, but had stopped attending follow-up appointments. She had no steady support system. Her parents lived out of state, and Lily's father had left long before she was born. What looked like an ordinary single mother's life was instead a fragile existence cracking under pressure. Detectives also noted subtle changes in Claire's behavior once she became the center of media attention. While she appeared distraught during interviews, off-camera she sometimes displayed a level of calmness that seemed out of place. One officer observed that after a candlelight vigil, she returned home and immediately asked about reporters waiting outside rather than the progress of the search teams. Another detective remarked that during questioning, Claire seemed more concerned about how her answers might sound on the news than about whether they would help the investigation. Her grief, while visible, appeared tangled with self-awareness, as if she were carefully shaping her role in the public eye. Investigators considered all possibilities. Stress, financial hardships, and mental health struggles did not automatically make someone guilty, but they often provided a motive, or at least a backdrop, to tragedy. The pressure Claire faced painted a picture of a woman cornered by life's demands, one who might have reached a breaking point. The missing pieces of her story, those unexplained hours, the contradictory statements, the silent night that no one else seemed to have noticed, took on new weight when seen alongside her private struggles. By now, detectives no longer spoke about a faceless intruder. The evidence pointed inward, toward a mother battling demons the public knew nothing about. To the outside world, Claire was still the devastated figure clutching her daughter's stuffed rabbit under flashing cameras. But to the investigators piecing together her past, she was increasingly becoming the prime suspect in a case that was shifting from a mystery about a missing baby to something much darker hiding behind the walls of her home. The investigation shifted into high gear as detectives brought in specialized search teams to comb through every inch of Claire A.'s property. From the beginning, her story had suggested an abduction, but the absence of outside evidence kept circling back to the house itself. Cadaver dogs were introduced, moving methodically through rooms that had already been examined by officers. While they did not alert in the nursery, their behavior changed in the basement. One dog lingered near a corner cluttered with old boxes, circling and pawing at the floor. The handler marked the spot, and soon the entire basement was being photographed, measured, and dismantled piece by piece. What at first looked like ordinary household storage became a scene of troubling discoveries. Behind stacks of cardboard and plastic bins, investigators uncovered a small storage area, partially concealed by a loose panel. The space was cramped, dusty, and smelled faintly of mildew. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a forgotten nook, but the items inside told a different story. Folded baby clothes lay in a small pile, several stained with something dark that appeared to be blood. Nearby, a broken rattle sat in silence, its handle snapped cleanly in half. The most disturbing find was the trace evidence collected from the floor. Faint spots later confirmed to be Lily's blood. These discoveries suggested that something violent had happened within the home, contradicting Claire's claims of a silent disappearance in the night. Detectives knew they were at a turning point. What had been treated as a missing child investigation was rapidly shifting toward a homicide inquiry. They carefully gathered every item, sending them to the lab for expedited analysis. News of the search leaked quickly, and soon television crews were parked outside, broadcasting updates as officers carried boxes of evidence out of the basement. The public, once united in sympathy for Claire, began whispering doubts. Social media erupted with speculation, with some defending her as a grieving mother under unfair scrutiny, and others suspecting she had been hiding something all along. Meanwhile, detectives examined Claire's behavior as the evidence mounted. During the search, she appeared anxious but oddly detached, pacing in her living room while occasionally glancing toward the cameras outside. Officers noticed that her tears came easily when reporters were present, but in private moments she often sat silent, her face blank and unreadable. When told about the discoveries in the basement, She reacted with disbelief, claiming she had no idea how those items ended up there. Yet the explanations she offered were vague and failed to address the blood evidence, a fact investigators could not overlook. As results from the lab confirmed the stains belonged to Lily, the weight of suspicion became undeniable. The missing baby was no longer presumed to have been taken by a stranger. The focus was now squarely on Claire. The public image she had crafted began to unravel, and the narrative that had once portrayed her as a desperate victim was replaced by headlines questioning whether the grieving mother had been hiding a far darker truth all along. Detectives prepared to confront her, knowing the next phase of the investigation would determine whether she continued to deny or finally revealed what had really happened in the house on that silent night. Detectives sat across from Claire in a quiet interrogation room, the evidence laid out in photographs before her. The blood-stained baby clothes, the broken rattle, and the hidden corner of the basement all pointed toward a reality far different from the story she had been telling the world. At first, she maintained her innocence, repeating the same lines she had given on television, insisting that someone must have taken Lily while she slept. But the longer the silence stretched, and the more the detectives pressed her with the lab results, the harder it became for her to hold on to the facade. Her hands shook, her breathing quickened, and the mask of the grieving mother began to slip. Finally, her voice cracked as she admitted what she had fought so hard to hide. She confessed that Lily had not been taken from her crib by a stranger. Instead, the events of that night had spiraled out of control inside her own home. Exhaustion and frustration had collided with months of untreated depression. Lily's crying, which had been unrelenting that evening, had driven Claire into a moment of rage she could not contain. In her confession, she described snapping, shaking the baby in a desperate attempt to silence her. The sudden stillness that followed filled her with terror. Realizing what she had done, she panicked, hiding the truth rather than seeking help. She placed the broken toy and blood-stained clothes in the basement corner, hoping they would never be found. Her televised tears, her candlelight vigils, her endless pleas were not for Lily's safe return, but for her own secret to remain buried. When news of the confession broke, the reaction was immediate and explosive. People who had prayed for Claire, who had lit candles and posted Lily's face on social media, felt betrayed. The same neighbors who had comforted her now turned away in anger and disbelief. Reporters who had once described her as a picture of grief now replayed her interviews with a different lens, dissecting every sob and gesture as signs of performance. What had seemed genuine sorrow was now viewed as manipulation. The nation's sympathy curdled into outrage, and Claire's name became synonymous with deception. The justice system moved quickly after her admission. She was arrested and charged with multiple counts, including manslaughter and evidence tampering. The image of her being led away in handcuffs became the defining photograph of the case, a stark contrast to the earlier footage of her weeping on live television. Her trial attracted widespread coverage, with the prosecution painting her as a woman who cared more about protecting herself than saving her child, while the defense emphasized her struggles with mental illness and financial hardship. In the end, the jury was unmoved by sympathy. The evidence spoke louder than her tears. Claire S.'s story became a cautionary tale replayed in true crime documentaries and news specials for years to come. What began as a national tragedy, a mother crying on television for her missing child, ended as a chilling reminder of how appearances can deceive. The very woman who had been the face of loss was revealed as the one responsible for it, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal that haunted everyone who had once believed her.